UFC Fight Night, Dariush versus Tsarukyan. The UFC heads to Austin this weekend in what should be one of the best non-pay-per-view cards of the entire year. Of course, this is headlined by a few of the best lightweights in the world. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and break down all the fights on this card. We're going to start off in the women's flyweight division. We have a matchup between Jamey-Lyn Horth and Veronica Hardy. Horth being 1-0 in the UFC, 6-0 overall, and the -180 favorite. Hardy, on the other hand, is 2-3 in her last 5 fights and is the +150 underdog in this one. I'm just going to go ahead and say I like Hardy as good value here. I have not really sunk my teeth into this matchup. I'd be lying to you if I said I went and watched all these two's fights ever. But she's taking on a largely unproven prospect in Jamey-Lyn Horth. She only has 6 fights overall and only 1 in the UFC. Hardy's got much more experience, and she's actually 5 years younger. So for me, I think that's a recipe for some good value. I also just think that undefeated records, especially in like some of these flyweight women's fights, they happen to get overvalued a bit in the betting markets. So I'm taking Hardy to win this one by decision. I think Dan Hardy has been showing her some good grappling tricks and whatnot. The next fight, we have a welterweight fight between Wellington, Turman, and Gooden. Turman is the -190 favorite, 2-3 in his last 5 fights. Gooden is the +160 underdog, and he's 3-2 in his last 5 fights, albeit 4 of those last 5 fights were not taking place in the UFC. Turman, he lost his welterweight debut versus Randy Brown, a fight that I had backed him in. And then before that, he lost versus Andre Petroski in a fight that I backed him in as well. So this guy has been burning me. But I really just want to believe in him because he's got that good grappling base. He's strong, and he's only 27 years old, under the tutelage of Glover Teixeira, of course, one of the best in the game, coaching-wise at least. You can look at Alex Pereira. Look no further than Alex Pereira to prove that. Gooden, on the other hand, he's 1-4 overall in the UFC, so he's had even a worse go of it than Wellington Turman. I think this is do or die time for Turman, and I feel like I've just pot committed on the guy, so I'm going to take him to win this one by submission. I think he should have a grappling advantage in this one. I could see the biggest issue, honestly, being the sweat of Gooden, because that dude just is dripping sweat immediately when he's in the cage, so that could be a tough obstacle to overcome. It's going to be hard to grab a hold of him, but I think if he does, I think he could hop on his back and get a submission. After that, we have a light heavyweight fight between Rodolfo Bellato. He's taking on Ihor Potieria. Bellato is 11-2 overall. He is making his UFC debut, and he is the -400 favorite. I forgot if I mentioned that already. Potieria is the +300 underdog, and he is 1-2 in the UFC. Bellato, he got a big Contender Series win after getting KO'd by Vitor Petrino his first time around on the Contender Series. He was a 2-1 underdog in his Contender Series fight. I backed him in that one. I thought he was good value, and he ended up getting a KO win. I will say the guy he was fighting didn't look too great, and it seems like he had some sort of leg injury going into that fight. I definitely think his opponent took that fight not at 100%, which is definitely worth noting. And I think a part of that contributed to how badly Bellato dominated him, and it's partly why Bellato is such a heavy favorite in here. Potieria, on the other hand, he's got a win over Shogun Rua. Shogun was about 15 years past his prime at that time. And then he's got losses versus Carlos Ulberg and Nugumarianu. I think Ulberg and Nugumarianu are both a lot better than Bellato in pretty much all facets. Definitely, you're getting unbelievable value out of Potieria. These are 2 light heavyweights that are going to throw hands, and it's not going to make it past the second round, most likely. So all it really takes is one shot, and usually I'd be all over an underdog in this case. But Potieria, he's just looked too poor in his 2 losses for me to back him in this one. I think Bellato gets a KO. Potieria's gas tank we've seen be a big issue, and he sort of panics and just starts spinning around, and I just never like to see that. So Bellato by KO is going to be the pick. Might still sprinkle a little bit, though. We'll see. Costa versus Garcia is off, so we move on to Drakkar Klose versus Joe Solecki. Klose is the minus 120 favorite in this one and is 4-1 in his last 5. Solecki is 4-1 as well in his last 5 fights, and he is the plus 100 underdog. So this one's pretty near a pick'em. Solecki is coming off of back-to-back wins versus Carlos Deaton and Alex De Silva. He's shown really good grappling throughout his UFC career. He can take you down and then just spend a whole round riding on your back, and there's not really much that guys are able to do about that. And so he's able to, get ahead on the cards through that way, because he definitely has a really good double leg and open space. His best opponent he faced was Jared Gordon, and he lost a close decision in that one. Gordon really did show that he was up for the grappling exchanges and honestly got the better of Solecki in most of those grappling exchanges. Klose, on the other hand, he is coming off of back-to-back wins versus Brandon Jenkins and Rafa Garcia. Jenkins, he just absolutely beat to a pulp, and Rafa Garcia put up a good fight and actually was able to take down Drakkar Klose a few times, but Klose was able to just outlast him. Klose is definitely going to have the striking advantage here, especially he's just way more capable of hurting Solecki on the feet. Solecki, I haven't really seen too much power out of him, whereas Klose is able to wobble guys, and he's got really heavy leg kicks, and he's good at fighting on the inside. I think he'll be able to keep the fight standing and win a decision this one, just doing a lot more damage to Solecki. Next fight we have is a middleweight fight between Zachary Reese and Cody Brundage. Reese is the minus 220 favorite. Last I checked, he's 6-0 overall. And he is taking on Cody Brundage, who is the plus 180 underdog and is 2-3 in his last 5 fights in the UFC. Coming into this one, Cody Brundage, his stock really has never been lower, even though he's coming off of a win. That's because his most recent win versus Jacob Malkoun was a fight where he was getting completely dominated and got bailed out by a forearm strike to the back of the head that got Malkoun DQ'd. So, I honestly think if he just had lost if he had gotten dominated and just lost it legitimately, I think Brundage would have taken less of a hit to his stock than him getting the fluky DQ win. I think people are really just fading him pretty hard in this one because of that. And before that fight, he had gave up 3 in a row to Cedric Dumas and a couple other guys. Reese, on the other hand, he is coming off of a Dana White Contender Series win and is making his UFC debut in this one. He got a round 1 submission in that fight. It was a really clean armbar, but it definitely wasn't just complete domination on his part. He actually was fighting off of his back because he got taken down, and he was getting hit by some pretty bad ground and pound. So, he didn't really show out like I think a lot of people were expecting him to in that fight. These guys are actually the same age. They're both 29 years old. Cody Brundage does have that wealth of UFC experience. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to call Brundage my dog of the week here. I got a few other underdogs that I'm picking, but I think even if they might be longer odds, this still feels like the most bold. I'm sacking up. I'm saying Brundage wins a decision in this one. Zachary Reese just didn't quite show me enough, and I think Brundage might just be a little bit stronger and be able to control him. We'll see. Reese is pretty much, I think he's won everything in the first round, and it's tougher to put guys away that quickly at the UFC level. So I think this one's going to make it out of the first round, and Zachary Reese is just going to be in a bit of trouble, and he's going to be in new territory, and Brundage will be able to take advantage of that. Let's move along before I keep rambling. We have a bantamweight matchup here between Julia Avila and Miesha Tate. Avila is the minus 155 favorite, 3-1 in the UFC. Miesha Tate is the plus 130 underdog and is 1-4 in her last 5 in the UFC. You know the name Miesha Tate. She's been around forever. This is her 13th fight in the UFC. And she's 37 years old. Has, not had the most success in the win column recently. Coming off a loss to Lauren Murphy, who's, had a bit of trouble lately in her own right. But she's got a lot of experience. Miesha Tate, good grappling. I just think the youth and athleticism of Julia Avila is going to carry her to a win here. Avila is super aggressive, and she she is able to find finishes better than I think a lot of the other contenders in the bantamweight division. She's super aggressive. She just wings punches at people, and I think that sort of uber aggressive forward style is going to lend itself to her finding a finish in this one. Tate has been finished more than she has gone to the cards in her UFC career. So, yeah, I think Avila finds a KO win here. Just sort of overwhelms Miesha Tate after she's able to get her on the ground. Next up is a middleweight fight kicking off the main card between Soriano and Dustin Stoltzfus. Puna is the minus 270 favorite. He's 2-3 in the UFC, or he's in his last 5. Stoltzfus is 1-4 in his last 5, and he is the plus 220 underdog. Puna definitely has not had the best record in the UFC, but he's shown flashes of why he's such a dangerous opponent for guys. He's got really heavy hands, and sort of that one-shot drop you kind of power. He is coming off of a loss to Roman Kopylov, but Kopylov is kind of on top of the world right now. He's been KOing everybody, so Stoltzfus is definitely a much different opponent. Stoltzfus, he won his Dana White Contender Series versus Joe Pyfer in what was definitely more of a freak accident than a I'm just better than you. He had a takedown attempt on Pyfer, who posted his arm and ended up just like dislocating his elbow or something. And really since then, Stoltzfus has not had much success. He just doesn't really he's just not very dangerous. He's not going to really hurt you on the feet. And is not as much of a submission threat as a guy who's, I feel like, relies on his grappling. So I think Soriano wins this one by KO. I think he's able to deter Stoltzfus. Is going to try and grapple with him and get him a little tired and then knock him out. Next up, we have a lightweight fight between Joaquim Silva and Clay Guida. Both these guys are 2-3 in their last 5 fights. Silva is the minus 325 favorite, with Clay Guida coming in at around plus 260. Clay has definitely stood the test of time in his career. He's been able to stay relevant for super long. He wins one, he loses one, he wins one, he loses one. He just is able to hang around and win enough fights for the UFC to, justify keeping him around. He's super hype, and it's just good to have those guys around. So I'm definitely a big fan of Clay Guida, a guy who's sort of the bridge between the old UFC and the new. He's got that grappling style. He's gonna try and just wear you down and, mix in the wrestling and try and beat you on the cards that way. Silva, on the other hand, is a guy who's got really heavy hands. He took on Arman Tsarukyan, who, Tsarukyan was kind of crazy to even accept that fight. He didn't have much to gain, but just wanted to show the UFC that he's ready for anything. So he took on Silva on short notice, and Silva ended up dropping, or pretty much wobbling Tsarukyan really bad in that fight. Of course, he did go on to get finished after that, but I think people thought of that as sort of like a moral victory for Joaquim Silva, for him to give Tsarukyan that much problems. I'm going to give Silva the edge in this one. He's got really good takedown defense. I think if Arman struggles taking him down, Clay Guida is definitely going to struggle. But I definitely think Clay Guida's got a better than a 2.5 or 3-1 chance to beat Silva. It's just I wouldn't really bank on it. So I think Silva wins this one by decision. Guida, I think, will do enough to hang in there and definitely give Silva a lot of problems and frustrate him on the fence, but Silva will be able to just do more damage and win that way. Next up, we have a welterweight fight between Sean Brady and Kelvin Gastelum. Brady is 4-1 in his last 5 and is like the -120 favorite here. Gastelum is coming in at pretty much even odds and is 2-3 in his last 5. Brady, of course, is coming off of a KO loss to Belal Muhammad. He really just didn't have much of an answer for Belal on the feet in that fight. Belal is not really known for his striking, but that was definitely his most impressive performance that I've seen of his. He was able to neutralize the grappling of Sean Brady, and from there, Belal really just put the pressure on him and just overwhelmed him with strikes and got the KO win there. I don't think Sean Brady had really ever dealt with that kind of pressure up until that point, and he really ended up kind of crumbling under it. But up until then, Brady was on a crazy win streak. He's got great grappling. He's going to come in. He's going to try and take you down and submit you. And he's had a lot of success in the UFC doing just that. So he definitely the guy just knows how to win. And a loss to Belal Muhammad, who's likely the next challenger for the welterweight title, is not too bad. Gastelum, on the other hand, he's coming off a win versus Chris Curtis at 185. He looked super fast, super good in that fight. He's a guy who's dealt with a lot of injuries, but when he's 100%, he's definitely dangerous. And he ended up, winning a lot of the striking exchanges versus Chris Curtis. A inadvertent headbutt, I think, had a really big impact on that fight, and I think if that doesn't go down, I think Chris Curtis is able to respond a lot better than he ended up responding, and I think he makes that fight a lot more interesting and potentially wins it, but that's just how it went. Of course, now Kelvin Gastelum is making his welterweight debut. He looks good at 170. A lot of people are probably screaming at him to make this move a long time ago, but he was hanging in with the big players at 185, even though he was losing a lot of those fights. I don't think Gastelum is really going to has really had his grappling tested to the level that it's about to be tested in this fight versus Sean Brady. And I think people are kind of overrating his performance to Chris Curtis, not to downplay it at all, but I think that fight was a lot closer than people want to give it credit for. We'll see if Brady made any changes to his striking abilities, at least enough where he can deter Gastelum enough on the feet and keep him thinking about the takedown, but still have that threat of striking as well to mix in the grappling. I think Sean Brady wins this one by decision. It's just tough to rely on Kelvin Gastelum to get wins when he's lost more than he's won in the UFC, I'm pretty sure. Or at least in his last 10 fights, he's 4-6 in his last 10. I think Sean Brady's going to be able to get back in the win column here, but I wouldn't be surprised if Gastelum looks pretty good at 170. Next up, we have a bantamweight fight between Rob Font and Deiveson Figueiredo, a fight that definitely could have been the co-main of this card. Font is the slight -135 favorite. He is 2-3 in his last 5, and Figueiredo is the +114 underdog, and he is 3-2 in his last 5. Of course, Font, he put up kind of a stinker against Corey Sandhagen. The guy just got taken down every single round and had no means of getting back to his feet. That's just the reality of the situation. That was a glaring hole that Corey exposed, but I think Corey did admit as well that he knew the risks of standing with Rob Font, that Font's a guy with super clean striking and super good cardio, so he was content to sort of rely on the grappling to get him the win there. I don't think Figgy is going to pose near the problem in the grappling department as Corey Sandhagen did. Figgy's moving up from 125. He's a lot smaller. He's only like 5'5", where Font's, I think, around 5'8", 5'9". And there's going to be that reach advantage for Rob Font. I like Font a lot in this one. Figgy hasn't looked the best in his last couple of fights. He's not really knocking dudes out or wobbling people like he did for a long time at 125. And his power was really what separated him from the pack in the flyweight division. So I will say Figgy does have experience versus a guy like Moreno. Of course, they fought a billion times. And Moreno is a bigger guy at 125. So I think that'll help him a lot in this matchup. But Font's even longer than Moreno, and Font's got the really just great striking. So I think Font wins this one by decision, is able to just sort of use his jab, and he throws a lot of strikes, and he gets ahead of you on the cards really quick, and it's hard to come back. So I think Font wins a unanimous decision here versus Figgy, but very excited to see how 135 looks like on Figgy. Our co-main event is up next. It is a lightweight fight between Jamey-Lyn Turner and Bobby Green. Jamey-Lyn Turner is the minus 225 favorite, although last I checked, it was moving down a little bit. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and Bobby Green is the plus 185 underdog or so, and he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Both these guys had pretty eventful 2023s, although Jamey-Lyn's certainly went a whole lot worse. He had 2 crazy fights versus Gamrot and versus Dan Hooker. Of course, the Gamrot fight, he had his moments, definitely, but Gamrot was able to just use the grappling, and, Jamey-Lyn really struggled with Gamrot's grappling pressure and just had no answer for the takedowns. And then, of course, he followed that up with a fight versus Dan Hooker. That's definitely a fight of the year candidate, in which it's a miracle Dan Hooker made it out of that fight without getting KO'd, because he got hit so cleanly a few times. I know, of course, there's a high kick that I think it ended up breaking Dan Hooker's arm, and I don't know if it was the same one that wobbled Dan Hooker, but just as clean of a high kick as you'll ever see. And Dan Hooker was able to walk away from it and then find a way to beat Jamey-Lyn Turner, just sort of out-hustle, out-hard him a little bit. And, it's unfortunate, but that I feel like that almost kind of sums up Jamey-Lyn Turner's UFC career up to this point. A guy with, so much talent, so explosive, so dangerous. But, sometimes if you're able to sort of survive the onslaught, he's just gotten a lot of losses that way. I just feel like he's a lot better than his record indicates. But that's the sport for sure. Bobby Green, on the other hand, his year got off to a goofy start, had the no contest versus Jared Gordon, but he was able to finish it out with 2 back-to-back finishes of Tony Ferguson and then Grant Dawson. Tony Ferguson fight, I think it was closer than people were probably expecting, but he ended up choking him out. And then Grant Dawson, of course, in his first headlining fight, I believe, Bobby Green just put him out in like a minute. Absolutely crazy. A lot of people, didn't know that Bobby Green had that power, and he's more of a guy that's precision over power, but when you land the perfect shot, like right on the ear like he did, it's going to put pretty much anyone out. So this should be a really exciting fight that I think is going to take place primarily on the feet. It's going to be a lot of fun. And, I was honestly thinking Jamey-Lyn going into today, but watching the weight cuts, it's just, I don't know what effect cutting all that weight is going to have on Jamey-Lyn. I know that he's done it plenty of times before, but I don't think on this short of notice. I think didn't prep quite as much. He did miss weight initially, and then somehow shedded a pound in like 5 minutes, and came back and made weight. But if you peek in like the background of the video, it looked like his guys had to like carry him backstage. So I don't know how much he can realistically recover in 24 hours. I think for that reason alone, I'm going to give Bobby Green the edge here. I think he wins a decision. And I think John Turner's going to have troubles with that gas tank because just so much of his energy is going to be sapped by cutting that weight. So Bobby Green by decision is the pick. And then finally, we have our main event. It is a lightweight bout between Arman Tsarukyan and Beneil Dariush. Tsarukyan is the minus 280 favorite. He's 4-1 his last 5, and Dariush is 4-1 his last 5 as well, coming in at around plus 225. For my money, Arman is pretty much the most talented lightweight outside of Islam at the moment. I'm sure the Charles Oliveira fans and the Justin Gaethje fans are up in arms about that, but I don't know if anyone has as diverse of a skill set as Tsarukyan. He's the best wrestler outside of Islam, even though Gamrot did end up out wrestling him in the later rounds in their fight, which Tsarukyan should have won on the cards. When all else was equal and both guys were at like full strength, Tsarukyan really was getting the better of those grappling exchanges. So I think, one of his biggest characteristics is his strength. The guy's just ridiculously strong, which helps him in the grappling department. And then on top of that, he's got great kicks and good hands. I think he just has a million ways to beat you. And he's a guy who's did end up losing, I think, a little bit of stock because he got stumbled by Joaquim Silva, but it's a fight. That stuff's going to happen. You're going to get hit, and he got hit really hard, but I look at it a bit more positively. Like, he was able to overcome that adversity and, how'd that fight end? It ended up with him on top, just smashing the guy. So that's my 2 cents on at least his most recent performance versus Silva. Of course, he's getting a ridiculously hard test in Beneil Dariush, which is kind of the perfect matchup to test Arman Tsarukyan's skills against, because Dariush is up there among the best grapplers in the lightweight division. He's got that jiu-jitsu background, which he's world-class in, like proven world-class in strict jiu-jitsu. Dariush was on an 8-fight win streak before he ran into Charles Oliveira, who ended up getting a head kick KO over Dariush. Going into that fight, I said Oliveira's the biggest advantage of anyone in that fight was going to be Charles striking, and it definitely showed. This is a great fight. Super excited for it. I think Arman will be able to take Dariush down and implement some ground and pound on Dariush, where I think that's where Arman shines the most. But I think Arman's got ways to beat him on the feet as well. I think his kicks, which obviously Dariush has a bit of problem defending kicks. He just got KO'd from a kick. I think Arman can rely on that if need be. So Arman by KO is going to be the pick here. It's a 5-rounder. These guys are both so dangerous. I can't really see this going 5 rounds, but I guess you never know. Where would Arman go from here if he gets the win? I could see a title shot by the end of 2024. It does feel like he is sort of 2 fights away. Of course, you got guys like Oliveira and Justin Gaethje ahead of him in the line, but you never know. I do have a future on Arman Tsarukyan to be champion at the end of 2024, which is where I think a lot of my bias is coming from, but yeah, those are the picks. I'm really excited for this card. Should be a blast. Like and comment and subscribe. Do all that stuff. I appreciate it. And this has been the DJ Phone Home Breakdown. See you on the next one.